Well, it is 11 o'clock, so we will get started. We'd like to welcome you to the third in our series on the family-friendly earth care and on reducing food waste. My name is Kelly Kunkel, and I'm here with Mary Schrader, and we are extension educators in health and nutrition with the University of Minnesota Extension. I'm based out of Mankato, and Mary's based out of Wilmer. And it's great to see all the different places that you are from. So it's great to have you here. Also with us today is Karen Mathis, and Karen Mathis is our webinar producer. So she will be popping in and out as well. So thank you, Karen, for your work on that. So today, what is our plan for today? We will identify ways to plan and to shop and to eat to reduce food waste. And we're going to recognize the food production dating on food labels to ensure food safety and reducing food waste. So why is this important? Why do we need to talk about food waste? Well, it's a huge concern. It's a huge problem. Did you know that over 90 billion pounds of edible food goes uneaten each year in the United States? That's the weight of 132 Empire State Buildings. That is a lot. And experts say that it costs people money, about $370 a year. The USDA estimates that about 30 to 40% of food is thrown out in the United States. And food waste in America has increased 50% since the 1970s. In addition, American consumers waste more food than other consumers around the world. For example, Americans waste 10 times more food than the people in South Asian counterparts. So this is a huge concern. Wasted food items make up the single largest component in our landfills, and many food tossed are still safe to eat. It's something that we could have been eating. Wholesome foods are tossed into the landfill instead of feeding people in need. And what's more, there's a cost to this: producing, processing, transporting, preparing, storing, and then disposing of discarded foods use resources such as land and water and labor and energy that could have been used for other purposes. Fortunately, organizations are making systems changes to reduce food waste, but there's a lot of things that consumers can do individually to make changes in their food waste. And so at this time, we're going to show a video. I'm going to stop sharing and see if you can identify if this is something that you've experienced.
Sweet baby, I'll travel the world for you. I love you.
Can we get strawberries?
No, honey.
Please?
Okay.
So has that ever happened to you? Things get pushed in the back of the refrigerator and you forget it even exists. Out of sight, out of mind. We have a reaction button at the bottom on the right hand side of your screen. If you want to just hit one reaction, if that ever happened to you, if you've ever experienced for just forgetting about, yes, Rocky. Yep, thank you. Absolutely. I see a lot of reaction buttons there. So there are things we can do as consumers to help to reduce food waste. And so I'm just going to go, um, in addition to the food waste that we're seeing, the labor and all of the other things, we know that there's an increase in food right now. We saw this during the pandemic, and the USDA says that the food at home will increase in 2022 by 1.5 to 2.5%, and food away from home will increase by 3.5 to 4.5%. And so if we're throwing that food away, it's an added waste, and we really want to help to reduce the amount that we spend in groceries at a time when foods are getting higher. So what can we do as consumers? Well, we can certainly plan to save food and to save money. Making a weekly list, making a weekly plan for our menu is so beneficial, and really doing an inventory on what's currently on hand. What do you have in the refrigerator? What do you have in the freezer? What do you have in the cupboards for dry goods? And start to make a list of the things that you need to go along with the foods that are in your cupboard, to make a full meal, to do some menu planning. Feature a meal with a leftover, or whether you call it leftovers or do-over or encore meals, they can all be something that can be used. Often at our house, we will make a meal, make dinner, and then use the leftovers, the do-overs, for lunches later on in the week, and that helps to reduce that food waste. But as you see the picture of the woman looking in the refrigerator, making sure that you know what's in that refrigerator, and that things like the strawberries don't get pushed to the back. And it's so easy, as I said, out of sight, out of mind. And making sure that we do an inventory, and bringing those foods out to the front as they're getting older before we throw them out. We also want to be a smart shopper, making a list when you go to the grocery store, and it doesn't have to be that fancy Pinterest food list, grocery list. It can easily be something that you just put on an old envelope and take with you to the store. But making sure that you make a list. If you go to the store hungry, everything is going to look good. Try to stick to the list if at all possible. Know when the grocery store ads come out at your for your town, for your grocery store. In Mankato, they come out on Tuesdays. I can do some planning on Tuesdays to go, okay, these are the things I want to take advantage of. These are the things I want to make sure I get in the store. And then the trick is to stick to your list. Of course, it also is a trick to remember to bring it along to the store, but you want to make sure that you stick to your list and follow what you are going to do. And stores use a lot of techniques to get us to part with our money. And sometimes those 10 for $10, or some of those things that encourage us to buy more than maybe what we need, will also encourage us to create more food waste. Just recently, the sale, I was at the store and I bought a 5-pound bag of potatoes, and it was buy one, get one free. Well, I'm not going to go through a 5-pound bag of potatoes before the next bag would go bad. So was that a good deal? Well, it turned out it was a good deal because I was able to give it to somebody else, and take advantage of that sale. But otherwise, it would have gone to waste before I was able to use it. So understanding food product dating is so important. It's confusing. It really can be very confusing, but there's 3 key things to know. The sell-by dates are used by manufacturers to recommend to the store when a product should be sold to a consumer for best quality over its expected shelf life. Sell-by dates do not indicate food safety. Best by dates, or sometimes it's best before dates, indicate to the consumer when the manufacturer ensures the product will have its best quality. It also doesn't ensure food safety. And then use by dates are also set by the manufacturer to indicate to the consumer when the product is at its peak quality. So when it's the best. Eating food after its best by, use by, or sell by dates means that the product might not taste as good as it had if it would have been fresh, but does not present any food safety concerns. As long as it has been stored safely and transported safely, it should be relatively safe to eat. The only important exception to know about is on infant formula. And the infant formula quality will deteriorate nutritionally over time. So do not use after the use by date has passed for infant formula. And we had a question as you were registered for the class about meat and how long to store meat. And so one of the things that we'll share with you is a handout of all the different resources that we have, but one is the whole storage time for meats and other produce items. And we'll get that handout to you. But you can oftentimes you'll be able to store that meat in the refrigerator for, depending upon the type of meat, for several days, and it'll be fine as long as it stays cold. And then you can also freeze it. So if you want to extend the life of your meat, if you don't get to it, you can freeze it. But please know that the quality of the meat will deteriorate over time. So making sure that you mark what it is and then use it within that time frame. It wouldn't be a food safety issue, but it's a quality issue. Many of us have experienced freezer burnt meat where it gets kind of just doesn't taste good. It's not very appealing. And so making sure that we use it before that expiration of time. So one of the things we know about storing produce is that it lasts longer if you store it correctly. About 19% of vegetables and 14% of fruits are thrown away after their purchase. We often will purchase the produce and put it in the crisper drawer, and there it sits, and we can easily forget about it. And so how can we make sure that that doesn't happen is really important, and making sure that it's very visible, that maybe the crisper drawer will extend the life, but it's if it's hidden, it might actually be more beneficial to have it at eye level. We also know that there's a produce often emits or absorbs a gas called ethylene. And ethylene gas is a natural gas that fruits and vegetables release as they ripen. And for best quality and best flavor, you want to try to keep your fruits and your vegetables separated during storage. So if you're putting your fruits and your vegetables in that same crisper drawer, you're doing them a disservice. The quality will be impacted. Most fruits give off ethylene gas. And so on the left-hand column, you'll see all of the fruits that produce ethylene gas. And then on the right, you'll see the vegetables that are very sensitive, ethylene gas sensitive. And so you can really shorten the life of your vegetables. Some vegetables also give off an odor that is absorbed by fruits. And so it affects the flavor of the fruit. So trying to keep as best as possible the fruits and the vegetables separated, because what will happen is things like cabbage, you may have seen this, will get yellow and the leaves will separate. The carrots develop a bitter flavor. Broccoli or cauliflower turns yellow and their leaves separate and turn brown. And it can also have an off flavor too. Cucumbers will get yellow and soft. Green beans will turn yellow. Lettuce will get brown and develop rust spots. Potatoes will sprout. Summer squash gets soft. And sweet potatoes will turn brown or develop an off flavor. So all things that we don't want to see happen to our fruits and vegetables if they're stored together. I'm going to turn it over to Mary.
Thank you, Kelly. And we're getting some really good questions in the chat, and I'm going to try and cover some of those as I go through here. And at the end too, we'll make sure we cover any of those questions we haven't had a chance to respond to as we present here today. But lots of good questions and lots of good ideas too that people have. So we'll kind of catch some of those as we go through. So another really good idea is just getting organized. One thing I heard quite often when the stay-at-home orders went into effect 2 years ago was that people would say they were much better about using the food that they actually had in the refrigerator. A couple of reasons for that was one was that they were just at home more often and they didn't have that, last minute of like, oh, I'm getting home and I don't know what to have for supper. So you maybe just order out or you just make something really quick and don't really pay attention to what's in your refrigerator. Another reason was there was that concern about food scarcity. So I know personally, I really made sure that we did use everything because it wasn't like I would just run to the grocery store like I had done before. So I was much more attuned to what I was actually using. And then the last one was I just really was more organized at home too, because I wasn't going to different things in the evening. So I had more time to really go through my refrigerator, go through my cupboards and make sure I was using what I had. So here's some strategies that you can use to get organized a little bit more. And again, I know on this call today, we're probably all across the spectrum. Some people are probably very meticulous and know exactly what's in their cupboards and their refrigerators all the time. And then we have the other end of the spectrum where it's just very random and not paying a lot of attention. So keep that in mind as we go through this next little section here. It might be review for some of you, and for some of you, it might be like, that's a great idea, or some people might be, oh, that's really a stretch to do that. So the first thing really is first in, first out. So what this means is when you go grocery shopping, that you want to make sure when you get home that you're rotating your food. So for example, if you already had, like here's a thing of Miracle Whip let's assume it's in your refrigerator and it's about gone, you're going to want to make sure that you use up what you've already opened before you open that second one. I know at one time, I remember once somehow or another, we had like 3 things of grape jelly open. And it's like, how did this happen? So really making sure you're using the old items or the first ones that you got first. That's really helpful. And doing that both in your pantry and also in your refrigerator, making sure the things that you want to use first are up further and close. Also, just keeping things clean and organized. Some people maybe kind of designate a certain spot in their refrigerator where they're going to use the foods that need to be kind of used up within that week, or maybe you have a spot where you typically kind of put your leftovers. That's really helpful because then you know exactly kind of where to look. So it's not like those strawberries that end up in the back of the refrigerator that you kind of forget about. So those are some strategies that kind of help to do that. Also using like clear containers instead of like ones that you can't see through, because then you can just quickly, easily look at it and go, oh, that's where the leftover tater tot hot dish is, or this is where my beans are, or I forgot I had some leftover corn. I can add that to the corn I'm making tonight. And those are ways to kind of help make sure you're using those foods a little bit more, so you can just see them and know where they're at. Also making sure that you're labeling your leftovers so you know what's in those containers. This is especially important when you put it in the freezer, because if you're putting it in the refrigerator, you're probably going to use it up fairly quickly. But if you put it in the freezer, all of a sudden what you put in the freezer, you gets stuck underneath something else, and you're trying to decide later on, is this pork or is this chicken? It's sometimes really hard to tell which is which once it all gets frozen together and in that frozen state. So really making sure that you label things. I know I have a couple family members that just are not good about labeling, and it's always frustrating when I pull something out of the freezer and I'm like, I haven't a clue what this is. So that's really helpful. A strategy for that is to keep a permanent marker and maybe some tape someplace in your kitchen that's really accessible to everybody, so that they can quickly, write on a piece of tape and then put it on the food that they're using. Masking tape works a little bit better than the clearer Scotch tape, just because it sticks better when it's in colder temperatures. Some people write right on their containers, but I prefer not to do that because you only have so much space on your container. That being said, it is really nice if you buy the freezer bags, if you're putting something in the refrigerator or freezer, that has that little, typically most of them have a little white spot on it where you can actually write the name on, and it works really good with the permanent marker. So that's really helpful. Okay. I think oh, and when I did mention freezer bags, that's another important thing when you are putting things in the freezer, to make sure that you're using freezer bags and not just the thin, more the storage ones, because the freezer bags are designed to make sure that they keep the air out more so that you don't get things freezer burnt just quickly. So make sure you're using the freezer bags if you're putting things in the freezer. So, next slide. The next thing is to give leftovers new life. And there was a question I saw in here earlier about like cucumbers. It's like someone likes to buy those smaller cucumbers, and you can't quite get through them all before they turn bad. And cucumbers are one of those foods that just really, because of the water content, do not freeze well. They get really mushy and things. So one idea might be to maybe try and find a recipe for refrigerator pickles. The downfall of that is, my guess is you probably just have 3 or 4 small pickles or cucumbers that you need to use up. And most recipes for refrigerator pickles are quite large. So you might have to kind of experiment with it a little bit just to try it and see if that would be possibly a new way to use some of those cucumbers up, or even just slicing them up and putting them in a salad would be another idea. So just finding some different recipes out there is really helpful. There's a recipe or a site on the sheet we'll share with you. It's called it's myplate.com, which is the MyPlate you're mostly familiar with. And it has a recipe section on it now, or a kitchen section. And in there you can actually go in and you can put specific things that you maybe want to use. For example, you could put corn, and then it's going to give you a whole list of recipes that have corn in it. So that's really helpful to have. And I think that's especially important when you have a recipe that maybe uses just a small amount of something like cream cheese. I have a recipe that uses 2 tablespoons, and you buy it in an 8-ounce package. So trying to find some different recipes is really helpful, and making sure you're using those things up as much as you can, because again, the more it goes into the freezer, the refrigerator, the less apt it is to get used. So the sooner you can use it, the better for that. Also, freezing foods before they go bad is helpful. And as Kelly noted in the chat, not all foods freeze well. So we have a list on there too of things that do and don't freeze well, or a link to a website. And also keep in mind, if it's getting to the point, you want to make sure, like if you have food that you're not going to use, like produce, and it is something you can freeze, you freeze it before it gets too overripe, because once it gets poor quality, even if you freeze it, it's not going to be good. So making sure you're catching it and washing it and getting it frozen before it's too late is important with that. Another suggestion for like leftovers is if you have like peas and carrots or broccoli, some of those different things that you might have for vegetables for a meal, and you have, just maybe like 1/4 of a cup left, rather than just throwing it out, keep a container in your freezer of vegetables. So like if you have that, 1/4 of a cup of corn, you can dump that in there. And then maybe 2 nights later, you have some carrots that are left over, and you dump that in. And then the next time you go to make a homemade soup, you can just dump those vegetables in, and it's an easy way to use them. And you don't have to buy new vegetables for your soup. You can just use what you have. And that even goes for like, if you peel carrots or celery, and there's parts of the end of the produce that you might not be using, you can, again, keep maybe a freezer bag in your refrigerator and just throw those carrot peels in there. You can throw your celery tops in there. And then when it comes time to make a broth or a soup, you can use that kind of as your starter to make your broth. And that way, again, you're using the pieces that maybe would have gone to waste, rather than using, stuff that you could actually maybe use in your soup. So another good idea for that. So next slide. Next, we have serving meals. And there were a couple of questions here about kids and fruits and vegetables too. So we'll talk a little bit about this. So at mealtime, really just making sure you take what you can eat. And this is true with children too. We talk about what's called the division of responsibility, where it is up to the adults to decide what is served and when it is served, but then it's really up to the kids to decide how much and really if they want to eat. And they really have found that this strategy works well. It prevents less food waste because kids are taking what they want. And it also helps make for a more pleasant mealtime because there's not that tension over are you eating, are you not eating. It can sometimes feel like, oh, but my kids aren't getting enough to eat, or you know, I'm concerned about them not, trying new things. They've researched this quite a bit and they have really found that this works. So it's a nice thing to try to do. It takes a little bit to make that adjustment, but really allowing the kids to kind of lead what they're going to try is helpful. That being said, kids do have smaller appetites. And so sometimes they may take more than what they are going to eat, but just really encouraging them to, be mindful of what they're putting on their plate is a good thing. And it is always good to encourage, someone said you want to encourage them to try fruits and vegetables or any food, which you do want to do. And again, having a start with a smaller portion size is really helpful, and just making them available in different forms. And also, if you're trying new fruits and vegetables, making sure that you serve it with something that they already like. That's going to increase the likelihood that they will eat it, because again, they don't feel like they are going to be, if they don't like it, they're going to be hungry, or they're not going to have anything to eat. So serving it with something you like already is fun, and giving it fun names too. That also helps to encourage kids to try new foods. So, but it honestly is a balance. I know there were times when my kids were younger where you did end up throwing more away than what you wanted to, which is really frustrating. And it's just unfortunately one of those things that does happen at times with smaller children. Family style can also help, really making sure you're eating those family meals, because that allows you a lot of time to talk about different things. And again, the more you can make that a pleasant experience, the better. It's not the time to bring up, homework or things that maybe aren't going so well. Keep it a pleasant mealtime, because if people are more relaxed, they're going to be more apt to finish the food that they have on their plate. And also just, start small, take those smaller portions to start with, especially when eating out. That's a place where we find a lot of waste, because you're familiar with serving sizes are just so large at restaurants oftentimes. I will say that is one thing about food costs going up, is I have noticed that some of our serving sizes, like at restaurants, are getting a little bit more realistic in terms of what you can probably eat at a meal. So it's not a good idea. Okay, next slide. We also have just share things too. A lot of times we maybe get things we don't want. For example, during the holidays, you may have gotten a food gift from somebody and you're like, oh, that's not something that I like to eat. That's a great chance to give it to somebody else or to donate it to a food shelf. Just really trying to find someone that can actually use that food, so it doesn't just go in the garbage can because you don't like it, or if you have too much of it. So that's good to keep in mind. Also though, like with the food shelf, make sure though that you're donating good products to them and not things that are maybe getting really close to the expiration dates, or things that just are not good quality food. And also, if you do have like a garden or have extra produce during the summertime, contact them ahead of time to see if that is something that they can use. If they can, great. And if not, maybe they have some suggestions of other places that they, once they meet their quota of what they can realistically use, they might have some suggestions on other places where you can donate it to that might still be looking for some of that produce. So sharing is a great way to do it. I know there's getting to be more things, especially in the larger communities, of even just putting things online saying, I have X, Y, and Z that I'm not going to use. If someone wants to come get it, you're free to have it. So I think that's really helpful too, just using that social media to kind of share some of those things. And again, keep food safety in mind. You want to, be kind of paying attention to what you're getting and making sure that the food is safe. If it was something that was cooked and you don't know how it's been stored and if it's still safe, that's probably something that you might want to not accept. So, next slide. So the last thing we have on here is a little bit about composting. We do have a webinar coming up on April 7th, which is going to focus just on food composting. So I'm not going to go into it in great detail today. But again, making sure that anything that can be composted that you are saving, and making every attempt to kind of compost it. It really varies depending upon where you live in Minnesota. If you live in a city that collects compost, that's really slick, because they usually have the truck that comes by on a schedule, and you save it in a smaller container and then you put it into a larger one and they collect it and compost it for you, which is handy. If you don't have that option, you can also purchase small food composting bins. And again, there'll be much more about that on April 7th to learn more about the composting. So I think we have lots of things. I've noticed the chat's really been filling up as we've been going through. So I think we'll maybe just kind of look at some of these chat questions. And Kelly, have you kind of been following them a little bit? So you can maybe tell us what our questions are. I don't have to catch up on the reading it quite as much.
Yep, there were a lot of sharing, a lot of the suggestions and things that have people are working well. The questions about it, if it's okay to freeze in a mason jar. And yes, as long as you make sure you leave enough headspace so that there's expansion during freezing. And also knowing the type of freezer you have. If it's a chest freezer, sometimes things get tipped over and might leak, or when it's not frozen or break, if people knock things around. So being aware of that. Some good tips on using ice cube trays for freezing lemon zest and stock and pesto. Several shared that things get lost in the refrigerator. One person stated that they had their dad had 7 jars of open pickles in the freezer. You answered the question about children and kind of that aspect of food waste, some sharing of different products, and we can send the list of the chat to people.
One thing I thought I forgot to mention when we were talking about the refrigerator is someone in there had how they really make sure they try and clean it out well before they do a big grocery shopping trip. So that's a great idea, kind of so you really know what you have and what you don't have in your refrigerator. And this is also, I think, where menu planning comes in helpful, because if you do plan out your menu, especially if you write it down, I'd like to sign off in here. Then you know, it's like, what day did I have the baked beans on? Was it on Monday or was it a week ago Monday? So that can help too, because then you know, it's like, otherwise sometimes you kind of forget, when did I have that? And you're like, well, I'm just going to toss it because I'm not sure how old it is, where it might have just been maybe 2 days old and you just forgot you had it 2 days ago. So again, that helps to do that menu planning. And I just can't talk enough about how beneficial menu planning is to really reducing food waste. You wouldn't think of it, but it really does help, because you pay more attention to what's in your refrigerator. And like we actually do kind of plan Thursday nights as kind of our leftover night, because that tends to be when we're kind of getting to the point we need to get stuff used up, and then it's a nice night. You don't have to maybe make a big meal. You can just kind of use what you have.
Julie shared a resource that the Extension Yard and Garden has a new home composting video, and the Spanish version will be coming out soon. Somebody shared that they used a dry erase marker to mark what they are storing.
Oh, that's a good idea.
And then they can wipe it off.
I hadn't thought of that. Thank you.
What about plastic? Does it make fruits or vegetables ripen faster?
I would say with that one, again, there's so many different types of plastic, but going back to what Kelly was talking about with ethylene gas, that's probably the most important thing, is what is it that you are putting into that container? If it's something that produces that ethylene gas, if you put it in a plastic container, it's going to ripen faster than something that doesn't produce that ethylene gas. And if you store them together, I guess you wouldn't really do that in a plastic bag, but if they're next to each other on the counter, that can make a difference. There are actually times when you do want to put foods in a container, like a bag, like peaches. That is a good way to ripen them quicker, because that ethylene gas trapped will help ripen the peaches more quickly. And that's true with some of the other things, even like bananas, you can do that with. So that will help with that. I'll admit, I'm not really up on in terms of the different layer, types of plastic and which ones keep food longer and not as long. Kelly, do you know anything about that?
There's several questions about plastic bags and which ones to use, or containers. And there are reusable plastic bags that you can purchase, or the waxed paper type covers that work. So does fruit or vegetables last well in glass, like mason jars or glass storage containers?
What was that, Kelly? I couldn't hear the first part.
Yeah. Does fruit or vegetable last well in glass jars, mason jars or glass containers?
Yeah, the glass is actually a good way to store different things. So it keeps the moisture in well. I've had really good luck using glass, and it is nice. It is reusable. Going back to the plastics again, if you're going to put it in the freezer and it's going to be plastic, make sure it's a freezer plastic, because that does make a difference. If you just put in like a cheap plastic container that you got and you put that in the freezer, it's more apt to get freezer burnt than if you actually use a plastic container that's designed to be put in the freezer. Some people prefer to use the plastic containers in the freezer, especially maybe like a chest freezer versus like a glass, because you do have to worry sometimes about the glass breaking. I had that happen once and that was not an enjoyable experience. So that is an advantage of the plastic in, for some different things. A lot kind of depends upon personal preference too, and what some of your other thoughts are about plastics in the environment versus glass and some of the other containers. But there's getting to be more things out there, which I think is really, really nice. I know I have tried someone mentioned about the cloth with the beeswax on it, and that is a nice option. I've had good luck with that. And we've done some experimenting like with wrapping sandwiches in it, and it kept the quality really good and has been easy to reuse again. So, but on the flip side, we also use plastic bags if I'm sending my kids on a field trip, and that cloth waxed one may or may not make it back. So then I make sure that I just need to use a disposable one. Okay. I see someone has a comment about home biogas, and I am not familiar with that, unfortunately. I've not heard of that before, but it'll be interesting to look up. So
Somebody shared that they use a brown bag to ripen avocados and pears. And so that's a nice, which is a nice alternative to plastic. Somebody else shared that they freeze their fruits and vegetables and make smoothies.
Yes, that's a great idea. Yeah, great idea. And there's some fruits that you can just, pears are just notorious. For example, it's like you can look at it one day and it's not ripe. You're like, okay, I'll have it tomorrow morning and it'll be ripe. And then overnight, it just gets beyond that. It gets really soft and mushy. So there's some that are just hard to time perfectly.
Somebody said they use empty boxes in the bottom of their freezer to create compartments for different foods.
Ooh, cool idea.
Storage. And somebody else uses milk crates. What about potato storage? And what I know about potato storage, making sure that it's in a cool, dry place and away from any fruit so that it doesn't create sprouting of the potatoes. And not to refrigerate.
And I've also learned that if you look at potatoes when you buy them at the store, you will notice there's one side that is dark or that the print is on and the other side is light. You want to make sure when you're storing it at home that it's not exposed to the light, so that like the label side is up versus the other way around. I had some once that got exposed to light too much, and that's when you start to get more of that green tinge to it too. So just a little hint with that. And Kelly, you mentioned not storing them in the refrigerator. That's a good tip too, is that you want to store your produce where you find it in the grocery store. So like even tomatoes, a lot of people want to put in the refrigerator, but you're going to get that quality better if you leave it out on the counter. And again, make sure you use it before it goes bad.
And Julie shared that potatoes should not be green. That's toxic, and that light causes this green on the potatoes. I think we're caught up on questions and comments for now.
So we do have a certificate of participation. If that is something that you would like, just let us know. And you can complete the evaluation that'll be in our chat in just a moment. And on there it has where you can request a certificate. So next slide. So we do have an evaluation that Karen will be putting in the chat. This is just a really short evaluation. It just kind of helps us know a little bit about what you learned today and what are some other things that you might be interested in. And then also watch, in about 30 days, you're going to get a follow-up email. It's just nice for us to know, how did you use some of the different information that you heard here today. So next slide. And we have several other webinars that are coming up. I'm not going to read all the topic. I'll just kind of go through the overview of the topics in general, and this will be in your link follow-up email too. We do have several different webinars that are available in Spanish. Next one. We have a couple more in our Family Friendly Earth series, and these I just will mention since that's part of this series. We have the edibles and decoratives from the woods or backyards, and that's March 3rd. April 7th, food composting, and then April 24th is reducing your family's carbon footprint. So again, ties in really nicely with this family-friendly earth care. We also have some webinars coming up on finding balance. Next one, next slide. Making sense of it all. We have some financial management staff that are going to share some information on how you can stretch your food dollars, or not food dollars, all your money a little bit more, making sense of that. So next slide. And also some on No Place Like Home, just things related to your home and renting and a variety of different things on that. And then recovery and health. I think those are all. Oh, and then one more, just a couple that don't quite fit in a series, but are really great webinars also. So you can search for all our webinars on the extension site, and that will also be in our follow-up link. So great ways to learn lots of different information on a lot of different topics within extension. Next slide. And finally, we do have different ways you can continue to engage with us. We have a Facebook site, Instagram, Pinterest, a variety of different ways depending upon what type of social media that you do like. And we also have just a family news e-newsletter, which will kind of keep you up on the latest on what's happening in our Center for Family Development and things that we are doing related to families. So what we'd like you to do just really quickly, if you could just unmute or type in chat, and actually a lot of these things have been coming through already, but maybe you thought of something else. What is one thing that you have done or will do to reduce food waste at home or at work? Let's take a moment and we'll kind of put those in the chat, or again, if someone wants to unmute, you can certainly do that. Okay. Julie has on there too. Be sure and check out the Extension Yard and Garden webpage. Lots of good stuff on starting seeds too, and fruits and vegetables. Use a list, get organized. Someone mentioned some freeze vegetables. Oh, for container for the soup, that works really well. Been doing composting. Cook reheatable meals on the weekend so they're quick and easy to grab. That's a great idea. And also a nice way, a lot of those reheatable meals at times are casseroles where you can easily add different vegetables in with that too if you have some leftover ones. So next slide. I think this one's actually, yep. So if you have any questions on food waste, be sure and let Kelly and I know. And again, thanks for attending today. We really enjoyed sharing this information on food waste, and hopefully you got some good ideas. We see lots of things coming through on the chat. So you can just kind of go through and look at some of the different ideas that people plan to do or maybe you're already doing. So Kelly, do you want to wrap up final thoughts before we wrap up?
Yes, thank you, Mary. Be sure to join us for the next 3 of our family-friendly Earth Care series, and we will be sending out a follow-up email to you with, we can send the chat as well as the handouts. So take a moment to fill out that evaluation, as Mary said it too. Love the ideas that are coming in. Thank you, everyone.